The dream always started the same way. Kira Donovan's hands moved across the metal briefcase, fingers slick with sweat despite the freezing Montana air. The digital display glowed red in the darkness. 47 seconds. 46. 45. 4 wires. Red, blue, yellow, black. One would disarm the device. One would detonate it immediately, turning 3 city blocks into a radiation zone. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, distant and warm, like summer sun on California sand. When everything falls away, little warrior, you'll know who you are. 44 seconds. 43. But the voice fractured, distorted. The briefcase melted into desert sand. Kabul, August 2021. Radio static crackled in her ear, and then her father's final transmission. Find the truth, little warrior. Find. The explosion tore through her consciousness like a fist through paper. Kira jerked awake in the Humvee's back seat, her hand instinctively reaching for the Sig Sauer P226 holstered at her hip. The Montana landscape rolled past the window in endless white. Snow-covered fields stretched to horizons broken only by skeletal trees, their bare branches clawing at a gray January sky. 3 years. 3 years since Kabul. 3 years since they'd handed her a folded flag and called it closure. 3 years of hunting ghosts. "You good back there, ma'am?" The voice came from the front seat. Sergeant Cole Briggs, 29, built like a college linebacker who'd found purpose in the Army. His eyes met hers in the rearview mirror, assessing. "I'm fine, Sergeant." The lie came easy. It always did. Beside Briggs, Corporal Owen Fletcher kept his eyes on the road, but his shoulders had tensed at her movement. These men didn't know her yet, didn't trust her. To them, she was just another diversity hire with a famous father's name, sent to a forward operating base in the middle of nowhere for reasons nobody had bothered to explain. They would learn. Kira pressed her forehead against the cold window glass and watched the landscape blur past. 40 miles from the Canadian border, close enough to feel the weight of international complications, far enough to maintain plausible deniability. This was the kind of place that didn't exist on any official map, the kind of base that would be denied by every government official who knew exactly where it was. Her father had told her about Frost Point once, years ago, over beers on the back porch of their San Diego home. He'd been careful with the details. Classified operations stayed classified, even between father and daughter. But he'd mentioned the name, mentioned the man who ran it, Colonel David Grayson, the man who owed Patrick Donovan his life, the man who was about to learn that debts didn't die with the debtor. Frost Point Forward Operating Base appeared through the snow like a memory half forgotten. Corrugated metal buildings hunched against the wind, their roofs white with accumulated snowfall. No flags flew here, no signs announced its purpose, just the kind of deliberate anonymity that screamed Black Ops to anyone who knew what to look for. The Humvee rolled to a stop outside the main command post. Kira climbed out, feeling the January cold hit her like a physical thing. 18 degrees, her training automatically registered. Wind chill bringing it down to near zero. The kind of cold that made every movement harder, every decision slower. She pulled her parka tight and headed for the entrance. The door swung open before she reached it, bringing with it a blast of heated air and the smell of gun oil, stale coffee, and testosterone. Inside, the command post hummed with focused energy. Men clustered around tactical displays, their voices low and professional. Maps covered every available surface. Satellite imagery, topographical charts, the tools of warriors planning violence. At the center of it all stood a man who made Kira's breath catch despite herself. Colonel David Grayson was 60 years old, and every one of those years showed in the lines around his pale gray eyes. His hair had gone the color of steel wool, cropped military short. His hands, weathered and scarred, pressed against a satellite map he'd clearly memorized hours ago. Those hands had killed men, had saved men, had pulled Patrick Donovan to safety in Panama 35 years ago, when both men were young enough to believe they were immortal. Kira knew his face from photographs. Her father had kept one in his study. Grayson and Patrick, arms around each other's shoulders, somewhere in Central America, grinning at the camera with the kind of brotherhood that only forms in combat. Now those same gray eyes lifted from the map and found her across the room. For just a moment, less than a heartbeat, something flickered across Grayson's weathered face. Recognition, grief, guilt. Then it was gone, locked behind the professional mask of a man who'd spent 4 decades hiding his feelings from subordinates. Transfer papers for Lieutenant Kira Donovan. The duty officer's voice carried across the room, loud enough for everyone to hear. Curious eyes turned toward her. Assignment to Special Operations Task Force 7. Effective immediately. Kira felt the weight of their stares. She was small, 5'3" in boots, maybe 120 soaking wet. The parka swallowed her frame, military green against the gray afternoon light filtering through frost-covered windows. When she pulled back her hood, auburn hair tumbled out, cut regulation short but still unmistakably feminine. She'd seen this moment play out 100 times. The dismissive glances, the poorly hidden smirks, the assumptions written all across their faces. Another politician's pet project, another diversity checkbox, another liability waiting to get someone killed. Let them think it. She'd proven them wrong before. She'd do it again. Kira approached the operations table where Grayson stood. Up close, she could see more details. The scar tissue on his left hand from burns that had never quite healed right. The slight favor he gave his right leg. Old injury, probably Panama or Grenada, compensated for so long it had become invisible to anyone who wasn't trained to notice. And his eyes. God, his eyes were exactly like her father had described them. Pale gray like a winter sky. Eyes that had seen things that would break lesser men. Eyes that held ghosts. Commander Grayson. Her voice came out steady, professional. Years of training keeping emotion locked down tight. Lieutenant Kira Donovan reporting for duty. The room had gone absolutely silent. Kira watched the recognition hit him like a punch to the solar plexus. The name. The face that must look so much like Patrick's. The eyes, green, the color of sea glass polished by decades of ocean waves, that were pure Donovan. Donovan. Grayson's voice came out rougher than he probably intended. He cleared his throat, tried again. Any relation to Master Chief Patrick Donovan? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fired weapon. He was my father, sir. The words dropped into the quiet like stones into still water. Kira saw it then, just a flicker, just a crack in the professional facade. Pain. Old guilt mixing with older grief. Grayson's hand tightened on the edge of the map table, knuckles going white. Behind her, someone, Briggs probably, let out a low whistle that got cut off immediately. They all knew the name. Patrick Donovan, SEAL Team 3, Force Recon Attachment. 33 years of service. Dead 3 years ago in Kabul, according to the official report. Tactical error, command failure, bad intelligence. The kind of sanitized bullshit that got stamped on classified operations when the truth was too ugly to speak aloud. Grayson straightened slowly, his soldier's bearing reasserting itself. When he spoke again, his voice had taken on the clipped tone of a man delegating tasks he considered beneath his immediate attention. I see. Welcome to Frost Point, Lieutenant. We run a tight operation here. He gestured toward a side room, not quite meeting her eyes. I trust your administrative skills are up to par. We've got equipment that needs maintenance. Master Chief Holloway will show you to the armory. There it was, the test. Kira had been expecting it, had been expecting some version of this since the transfer orders came through. Grayson couldn't treat her any differently than he'd treat any other unknown quantity showing up at his forward operating base. Had to maintain standards, had to see what she was made of. But there was something else beneath the professional dismissal. Something that made Kira's tactical mind sit up and pay attention. The way Grayson's eyes kept sliding away from hers. the tension in his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hand before he locked it down. He wasn't just testing her, he was afraid of her. Or more precisely, afraid of what she represented. The ghost of Patrick Donovan, walking back into his life wearing his daughter's face. "Yes, sir," Kira said, her voice betraying nothing. "Whatever you need, sir." A man stepped forward from the cluster of operators near the tactical display. Master Chief Frank Holloway was 64 years old and moved with the careful precision of someone whose knees remembered too many hard landings, whose back carried the memory of too much gear over too many miles. His face was creased leather, his eyes the faded blue of old denim. Time had weathered him like a rock formation, wearing away the soft parts until only the essential remained. Those faded blue eyes met Kira's, and something passed between them. Recognition that went deeper than names or faces. The kind of knowing that came from shared grief. "This way, Lieutenant," Holloway said quietly. Kira followed him toward a door at the back of the command post, very aware of the eyes tracking her movement. She kept her spine straight, her stride measured and confident. Nothing in her body language suggested weakness or uncertainty. Behind her, she heard Briggs mutter to Fletcher, $20 says she's crying in an hour. 40 says she quits by midnight, Fletcher replied. Kira didn't react, didn't acknowledge she'd heard, just kept walking, following Holloway through the door and down a corridor that smelled of metal and preservative oil. The armory waited at the end of the hall, and in the armory, Kira would show them exactly who Patrick Donovan's daughter was. The armory. The smell hit Kira the moment Holloway opened the door. Gun oil and preservative, metal and cordite residue. A scent she'd known since childhood, as familiar as her mother's perfume or the coffee her father brewed every Sunday morning. The scent of home. Weapons hung in their racks like sleeping predators. M4A1 carbines, M249 squad automatic weapons. And there in the back, the Barrett M82A1s, 50 caliber, 10 rounds of semi-automatic devastation, capable of punching through engine blocks at 1,000 yards. Kira's fingers itched to touch them. 20 M4A1s that need detail cleaning, Holloway said, his voice neutral but his eyes watching her carefully. 6 M249 SAWs with carbon buildup that would make a drill instructor weep. 3 Barrett M82A1s that have been sitting in storage since the last administration. He paused. Commander wants them combat ready by 0600 tomorrow, 14 hours. For someone unfamiliar with the weapons, it would be impossible. For someone who'd never done it before, it would be a very public failure. For Kira Donovan, it was Tuesday. Understood, sir, she said. Holloway studied her for a long moment. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. Little warrior. Kira's head snapped up. The nickname. Her father's nickname for her from the time she was 8 years old, and he'd first put a .22 rifle in her small hands. You know who I am, she said. Not a question. Your father and I served together for 20 years, Holloway replied. His voice had gone thick with emotion he was trying hard to control. He told me you made it through Bud/S, Class 358, Hell Week in November. Said you never quit, not even when they had you in the surf zone for 6 hours straight. A memory rose, sharp and clear. Pacific Ocean water so cold it felt like knives. Her body shaking so hard she couldn't control it. The instructors screaming. Other candidates ringing the bell, choosing warmth over continuation. And her father's voice in her head, steady as bedrock. One evolution at a time, little warrior. Just one more. You can do one more. She'd done one more, and then another, and another, until Hell Week was over and she was still standing. He taught me well, Kira said softly. He did. Holloway glanced back toward the command post, his expression troubled. Then he looked at her again, really looked at her, and something shifted in his weathered face. Does Grayson know about what you really are? No, my records are classified. DevGru operations, mostly Syria, Iraq, some Afghanistan work before the withdrawal. She paused, let the weight of what she was about to say settle between them. They transferred me here under administrative cover. Holloway's eyes narrowed. Why? Because someone needs to know the truth about August 2021, Master Chief. About what really happened in Kabul. The weight of those words settled between them like a physical thing. Holloway had been at Patrick Donovan's funeral, had helped carry the casket, had heard the official report about tactical errors in bad intelligence. He'd also heard Patrick's voice on a scratchy satellite phone call 2 days before that final mission. Words that had haunted him for 3 years. Someone sold us out, Frank. I don't know who yet, but someone on our side is dirty. Your father suspected, Holloway said carefully. My father knew. Kira's voice didn't waver, but Holloway heard the razor edge beneath it, sharp enough to draw blood. And it got him killed. Before Holloway could respond, the armory door opened again. Grayson stepped through, followed by the rest of the team. Lieutenant Wes Harper, 34, with the build of a college linebacker, gone professional soldier. Staff Sergeant Darius Kane, 41, whose scarred knuckles and cauliflower ears spoke to a youth spent in boxing rings before he found purpose in the military. And bringing up the rear, Briggs and Fletcher, curiosity written all over their younger faces. Master Chief, I need you at the briefing, Grayson said. His tone was all business, but his eyes kept sliding toward Kira and then away, like he couldn't quite bring himself to look at her directly. Lieutenant Donovan has her assignment. Let's leave her to it. Holloway caught Kira's eye, a question and a warning in his gaze. Not yet, her slight nod said. Not until the time is right. The men filed out, leaving Kira alone with 3 tons of weapons and 14 hours to prove something she shouldn't have to prove. She stood in the silence for a moment, feeling the weight of expectation pressing down on her shoulders. They wanted her to fail, wanted confirmation that she didn't belong here, wanted proof that Patrick Donovan's daughter was just a pretty girl playing soldier. Kira smiled. They had no idea what was coming. She started with the Barrett M82A1s. They were the most complex, and she wanted to be fresh for the detail work. The first rifle came out of its case with the familiar weight of serious engineering. 32 pounds of precision machinery designed to reach out and touch someone at distances most people couldn't even see. Kira cleared it by muscle memory. Magazine out, chamber check, safety verify. The movements were automatic, encoded in her nervous system through thousands of repetitions. Then she began the disassembly. A memory rose, sharp and sweet. California Desert, 2014. Kira, 16 years old, skin sunburned, hands blistered from training. The Barrett laid out before her like the world's most expensive jigsaw puzzle. What separates a good shot from a great one, little warrior? Her father's voice, warm and rough like sandpaper wrapped in velvet. It's not strength, Kira replied, repeating the lesson he'd taught her 100 times. It's not speed. It's knowing who you are when everything else falls away. Patrick knelt beside her, his weathered hands guiding hers through the reassembly. When your heart's pounding and your hands are shaking and everything's telling you to quit, that's when you find out what you're made of. Kira's young fingers fumbled with the bolt assembly. And what am I made of, Dad? Patrick smiled. Steel and stubbornness, little warrior, same as me. 43 seconds after she began, the Barrett lay in component parts on the cleaning mat, each piece positioned with the precision of a surgeon's instruments. Upper receiver, bolt assembly, barrel, lower receiver, recoil spring, firing pin. Her hands moved with the confidence of a master craftsman. Every motion deliberate, every placement exact. This was meditation for her. The same peace her father had described when he first put a rifle in her hands all those years ago. Everything else fell away. The grief over her father's death, the rage at his betrayal, the burning need for justice that had driven her across continents and through 3 years of investigation. None of it mattered here. In this moment, with tools in her hands and a mission to complete, here she was simply Kira Donovan, Navy SEAL, daughter of Patrick Donovan, master of her craft. She was working on the second Barrett when the door opened again. The reveal. 45 minutes had passed since they'd left her alone. Kira didn't look up from her work when she heard the door. Didn't need to. She'd been expecting someone to check on her progress, maybe offer some condescending advice, possibly catch her struggling so they could report back to the others. Military hazing had a long and storied tradition. Pretty girls with famous fathers made excellent targets. The footsteps stopped just inside the doorway. Silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. 4, 5, then, holy shit, that got her attention. Kira looked up to find Briggs frozen in the doorway, his expression caught somewhere between shock and dawning horror. She followed his gaze to her own left forearm, where she'd rolled up her sleeve to keep it clear of gun oil. The tattoo started just above her wrist and curved around her arm like a brand. The eagle, anchor, and trident of the Navy SEAL insignia, rendered in black ink with the kind of detail that spoke to expensive work and serious commitment. The kind of tattoo you earned, not bought. Below it, smaller but unmistakable, 4 letters that changed everything. DevGru, SEAL Team 6. Kira watched the pieces click into place in Briggs' mind with a slow horror of dawning understanding. DevGru didn't take administrative transfers. DevGru didn't do diversity hiring. DevGru was where you went if you were the absolute best of the best. If you'd proven yourself beyond any shadow of doubt. If you'd earned the right to wear that insignia through blood and pain and the kind of suffering that broke most people who attempted it. Around them, the evidence of her competence spoke for itself. 3 M4A1s lay completely disassembled on separate mats, their components gleaming from recent cleaning. The first Barrett was already reassembled and sitting in its case, ready for combat. And Kira's hands, black with carbon and oil, moving with practiced efficiency, were currently working on the bolt assembly of the second Barrett with the casual competence of someone who could do it blindfolded. "You need something, Sergeant?" Her voice was neutral, professional, but her eyes held something that made Briggs want to look away. No, ma'am." The words slipped out before he could stop it. Not LT or Lieutenant, but ma'am, the respectful address for an officer who'd earned it. "Just checking on your progress. I'll let the commander know you're doing fine." He backed out of the armory like a man who just realized he'd been poking a sleeping tiger with a stick. Kira returned to her work, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. 5 minutes later, the door opened again. This time, it was everyone. Grayson led the way, his weathered face set in lines of careful neutrality. Holloway followed, his expression betraying nothing, but something flickered in his eyes. Relief, maybe, or vindication. Harper and Kane brought up the rear, their linebacker frames suddenly tense with new awareness. They found Kira reassembling the third Barrett. Her movements were quick and sure, a professional at the top of her craft. Each component sliding into place with the satisfied click of proper engineering. But it wasn't her efficiency that made them all stop and stare. It was her left forearm. The eagle, anchor, and trident. The 4 letters below. DEVGRU. The tattoo that fewer than 3,000 people on Earth had earned the right to wear. Grayson's pale gray eyes went to her arm, to the tattoo that changed everything. For a long moment, he couldn't speak, couldn't process what he was seeing. Patrick Donovan's daughter, his little girl, wearing the mark that Patrick himself had worn with such quiet pride. "Where did you earn that trident, Lieutenant?" His voice was steady, but barely. Kira met his gaze, and in her eyes, Grayson saw something he recognized. The same unwavering focus Patrick had possessed, the same steel core wrapped in quiet competence. "Coronado, sir. Bud/S-Class 358, Graduated November 2020. She paused, let the weight of what came next settle between them. Selected for DevGru training, then operational deployment. 18 months in Syria, 6 in Iraq. Final rotation in Afghanistan before the withdrawal. The numbers were staggering. 18 combat deployments between ages 23 and 26. Most SEALs didn't see that kind of action in 10 years. Grayson did the math automatically. August 2021, his military mind calculating timelines and implications. Kabul, he said slowly, not a question. Yes, sir. Your father, the words stuck in his throat like broken glass. Master Chief Patrick Donovan, SEAL Team 3, Force Recon Attachment, 33 years of service. Her voice didn't waver, but Grayson heard the edge beneath the words, sharp as a combat knife. Died August 15, 2021, in a classified operation outside Kabul. The official report said tactical error, command failure, bad intelligence. She let that hang in the air for 3 heartbeats. I read that report, Grayson said quietly. Then you read a lie, sir. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a fired weapon. Holloway shifted his weight, his expression carefully neutral. Harper and Kane exchanged glances. Briggs looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. Kira set down the Barrett carefully, then rolled down her sleeves, covering the tattoo. Covering the scars that Grayson now realized marked her skin. Battle wounds that told their own stories. My father was many things, Commander Grayson. Her voice remained level, but her hands had curled into fists at her sides. But careless wasn't one of them. Neither was stupid. She moved to the cleaning station, her hands methodical as she wiped down tools that were already clean. The repetitive motions seemed to center her, to keep something carefully controlled from breaking free. Before he died, my father sent me a message. 3 words on a scratchy satellite phone connection. She looked up, meeting Grayson's eyes directly. He said, "Find the truth." The command post felt smaller now, the walls pressing in with the weight of revelation. Grayson thought about Panama, about the chaos of Operation Just Cause, about Patrick Donovan throwing him behind cover, taking rounds meant for a young officer who'd been too slow to read the ambush, about the debt he'd carried for 35 years, the guilt of surviving when better men died. And you think the truth is here? His voice was rough. In Montana? I think the truth is wherever weapons deals and intelligence leaks intersect, sir. Kira finished with the tools and turned to face him fully. The tactical nuclear device you're trying to intercept, the intelligence on its location, the timeline of the deal. She paused, let her words sink in. Does any of it feel familiar to you, Commander? Does any of it feel just a little too clean? Grayson's jaw tightened. The honest answer was yes. The intelligence on this operation had come through channels that made him uncomfortable, from sources that seemed too willing to share. The entire setup felt orchestrated, like pieces moving on a chessboard he couldn't quite see. You're suggesting this is a trap, Harper said from the doorway. I'm suggesting someone wants us here. Kira's correction was precise. Whether that makes it a trap depends on what they want. And what do you want, Lieutenant? Kane's voice was gravelly, suspicious. Why are you really here? Kira was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant, focused on something the rest of them couldn't see. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but absolutely certain. I'm here to finish what my father started. I'm here to find the person who sold him out and make sure they never do it again. She looked at each of them in turn. And I'm here to prove that Master Chief Patrick Donovan died doing his duty, not making mistakes. She paused, then added, That's what I want, Staff Sergeant. Justice, truth, and maybe a little bit of revenge. The honesty was startling. Most people wrap their motives in noble causes in patriotic language. Kira Donovan laid hers out like cards on a table, daring them to object. But before Grayson could respond, Kira held up a hand. Sir, with respect, I didn't come here for help. Her voice was steady, certain. I came here to do a job. The fact that you knew my father, The fact that you owe him, that's not why I'm here." She stepped forward and, despite being a foot shorter than Grayson, somehow filled the space with presence. "6 months ago, Marcus Vance contacted you, tried to recruit you, offered money, protection, said the wars were over and it was time to cash in." Kira's eyes locked onto Grayson's. "You refused, reported it through back channels, but Vance disappeared before anyone could act." The color drained from Grayson's face. "How do you—" "I've been investigating for 3 years, sir. CIA back channels, JSOC reports, NSA intercepts. I know Vance reached out to you. I know you suspected he was the leak that killed my father." Her voice went cold. "What I don't know is why you didn't tell me when I walked through that door." The silence that followed was absolute. "I had suspicions," Grayson said finally. "Not proof. There's a difference. And you brought me here anyway, used me as bait." "Yes." At least he didn't try to lie about it. Kira studied him for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she nodded. "Good, because that's exactly what I would have done." She pulled a folder from inside her jacket, set it on the cleaning table, opened it to reveal photographs, intelligence reports, classified documents that shouldn't exist outside secure facilities. Marcus Vance, age 38, Navy SEAL, formerly attached to DevGru, went missing 7 months after my father's death. Military records sealed, whereabouts unknown. She pulled out a specific photograph. Until now. The image showed a man on a rooftop, grainy, taken from distance, but clear enough. Dark hair, athletic build, the kind of face that would blend into any crowd. This was taken 3 days ago, 200 miles from here. Thermal imaging picked up his biometric signature. "He's here, Commander, in Montana, and he's waiting for us." Grayson picked up the photograph with hands that weren't quite steady. "You're certain?" "I'm certain Marcus Vance was my father's student, that my father trained him, recommended him for DevGru, vouched for him when others had doubts." Kira's voice was ice now. "I'm certain my father saved his life in Syria in 2018. And I'm certain that 3 years later, Vance sold intelligence that got my father killed." She looked at each of them in turn. "So yes, sir, I'm certain. And tonight we're going to finish this." The planning. The briefing room filled over the next hour as the team assembled for the tactical breakdown. Someone had made coffee, the kind of overbrewed military sludge that could strip paint off a tank. Someone else had produced a box of protein bars that tasted like sweetened cardboard. These were the rituals of soldiers preparing for violence, the small comforts before the storm. Grayson spread satellite imagery across the table, high-resolution photographs showing their target in stark detail. An abandoned mining complex in the mountains, 40 miles east. 3 buildings nestled in a valley, Soviet-era construction from some long-forgotten Cold War project. Concrete and steel that had weathered 40 years of Montana winters. "Intelligence says the exchange happens in 60 hours, Grayson began, his finger tracing the perimeter. "Tactical nuclear device, probably stripped from a Russian stockpile in the 90s, small enough to fit in a briefcase, powerful enough to level 6 city blocks." He let that sink in, the weight of what they were trying to prevent. "The buyer is unknown. The seller is former KGB, connected to organized crime networks that reach from Moscow to Miami. This is the kind of deal that happens once in a decade, the kind that changes the balance of power if it goes through." Harper leaned over the photos, his linebacker frame blocking some of the light. "Security estimate? 15 to 20 contractors. Mixed nationality, probably former military from half a dozen countries. Light armor, mostly small arms, maybe 1 or 2 vehicle-mounted weapons." Grayson looked around the table. "Standard protocol calls for overwatch position here." He tapped a ridge 800 meters from the target, with entry teams approaching from north and south. "But I want alternatives. I want contingencies, and I want to plan for this being something other than what we've been told." Kira had been studying the imagery in silence, her green eyes moving across the photographs with the intensity of someone reading a language the others couldn't quite see. Finally, she spoke. "The perimeter is wrong." Everyone looked at her. "Explain," Grayson said. She pulled one of the photos closer, pointing to details the others had glossed over. "See these positions? They're set up for external threat, watching the roads, covering the approaches. But there's minimal internal security. No overlapping fields of fire, no fallback positions." Her finger traced the defensive layout. "It's like they're more worried about someone coming in than something going wrong inside." "So they're confident," Briggs offered, "or they're expecting different guests." Kira's finger moved to another part of the image. "And here, this vehicle. It's positioned for rapid egress, not security. Someone in that building is ready to leave in a hurry." Holloway had been quiet, but now he leaned forward, his old eyes sharp. "You think it's a meeting, not just a handoff?" "I think someone important is going to be there. Someone who doesn't want to be identified." She straightened up. "If I wanted to set up a trap for a special operations team, this is exactly how I do it. Make the target juicy enough to draw them in. Make the security look manageable, but not suspiciously light. Then have overwhelming force ready to respond once they're committed." The room went quiet as the implications sank in. "You're saying we're the real target?" Kane's scarred knuckles tightened on his rifle. "I'm saying we might be, or we might be a convenient bonus." Kira met his eyes. "Either way, we need to plan for it." Grayson studied her, seeing not Patrick Donovan's daughter anymore, but a trained operator. Someone who'd survived 18 combat deployments by being smart, cautious, and ruthlessly realistic. The kind of soldier he wanted on his team. "All right," he nodded slowly. "We plan for both scenarios. Holloway, you and Donovan develop an alternative approach vector, something that doesn't follow the expected path. Harper, Kane, work on rapid extraction scenarios. If this goes bad, I want multiple ways to call for support and multiple ways to disappear." The team dispersed to their assignments, the command post filling with focused energy of professionals doing what they did best. Kira found herself at a secondary table with Holloway, spreading out topographical maps that showed terrain the satellites couldn't quite capture. "You handled that well," Holloway said quietly, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "I handled it honestly," Kira replied. "Whether that's well remains to be seen." "Your father would be proud." Kira's hand stilled on the map. "My father would be alive if someone hadn't sold him out. That's what matters now." "Revenge won't bring him back, little warrior." "No," she looked up, meeting his eyes, and Holloway saw the steel beneath the grief. "But justice might help me sleep at night, and making sure it never happens again, that's worth whatever it costs." Holloway reached across the table, his weathered hand covering hers. "Just remember what your father taught you. Stay smart, stay controlled. Anger makes you sloppy." "I remember, Master Chief." Kira's voice was soft but certain. "I remember everything he taught me. That's why I'm going to win." They worked through the night, the team coming together in the way that good units do, finding rhythm and trust despite the circumstances. By 0300 hours, they had 3 different operational plans, 2 backup extraction routes, and enough contingencies to make even the pessimists feel cautiously prepared. Kira had finished with the weapons hours ago. Every rifle cleaned and function checked, every component gleaming and ready. She'd worked through it mechanically, the familiar task giving her hands something to do, while her mind processed the larger problem. Somewhere out there, within reach but still hidden, was the person who'd killed her father. Marcus Vance, the man Patrick Donovan had mentored, had trained, had saved. The man who'd repaid that kindness with betrayal and blood. Tomorrow, the hunt would begin. Tomorrow, 3 years of investigation would come to a head. Tomorrow, Kira Donovan would prove that Master Chief Patrick Donovan's daughter was every bit the warrior he'd raised her to be. But tonight, she had one more thing to do. At 0400 hours, Kira stepped outside. The snow had stopped, leaving the world crystalline and clean under a sky full of stars. Her breath plumed in the frigid air, each exhalation a small ghost that dissipated into darkness. The cold bit through her jacket, but she barely felt it. 3 years of hunting had led her here. 3 years of following breadcrumbs through CIA back channels and JSOC reports. 3 years of patient, methodical investigation that would have made her father proud. And now, finally, she was close. Couldn't sleep? Kira turned to find Grayson standing a few meters away, a cup of coffee steaming in his hands. He ditched his jacket, apparently immune to the cold or too tired to care. Sleep's overrated, sir. So's rank when it's just the two of us. He moved to stand beside her, looking out at the same stars. Call me David. Kira nodded, accepting the informality. In the field, especially on small teams, the lines of hierarchy blurred into something more pragmatic. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Grayson spoke, his voice quiet against the vast Montana night. Your father and I went through SEAL training together, back when it was still UDT, before BUD/S became the standard. We were kids, 19, 20 years old, thought we were the toughest things alive. He took a sip of his coffee. Hell Week broke that illusion pretty quick. Your father told you about Hell Week? He said the only way through was one evolution at a time. That's what he told everyone. It's how we got through, how he helped the rest of us get through. Grayson was quiet for a moment. Panama was my first real combat. I was a lieutenant, green as grass. Thought I knew everything because I had bars on my collar. His voice grew distant with memory. Patrick was a chief by then, old hand at 25. We hit resistance near Torrijos Airport and I froze. Just for a second. But in combat, a second is forever. He turned to look at her. Your father threw me behind cover, took the rounds that should have killed me. 3 of them, one in the vest, one through the shoulder, one grazed his head. Should have killed him. Would have killed most people. Kira had heard the story before, but never from this angle. Never from the man whose life her father had saved. He never talked much about Panama, she said softly. He wouldn't. That wasn't who he was. Grayson finished his coffee, crushed the cup, tossed it toward a waste bin 15 feet away. It landed perfectly. He just looked at me after, bleeding from 3 holes, and said, next time, don't think. Just move. Best advice you ever got. Best advice anyone ever gave me. Grayson's expression grew serious. I've been doing this for 40 years, Kira. I've seen a lot of operators, a lot of warriors. Your father was special. Not because he was the strongest or the fastest. There were always guys who could outlift him or outrun him. He paused. He was special because he understood what this job really costs. And he did it anyway. He understood the price and paid it willingly until someone took the choice away from him, Kira said quietly. Yeah, Grayson's voice went hard, until that. They stood in silence for a while, 2 soldiers in the darkness, breathing clouds of vapor into the Montana night. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. The sound was lonely and clear, echoing off the mountains. Tomorrow we move on that complex, Grayson said finally. Whatever we find there, whatever truth you're chasing, I need you focused. I need you sharp. Can you do that? Kira thought about her father, about the last time she'd seen him alive, at a family barbecue, grilling steaks and arguing about baseball. She thought about the flag they'd handed her at the funeral, folded into a perfect triangle, as if geometry could contain grief. She thought about the message he'd left her, 3 words that had driven her for 3 years. Find the truth. I can do that, David. Her voice was steady, certain. I can be whatever you need me to be. Good. He turned to head back inside, then paused. And Kira, tomorrow isn't your father's mission. It's not my mission. It's yours. You're the one who found Vance. You're the one who put this together. So when we go in there, you lead. Understood? Kira felt something catch in her chest. Not gratitude exactly, more like recognition. Grayson wasn't just helping her out of debt to her father. He was acknowledging her as an equal, as a warrior in her own right. Understood, sir. Grayson nodded and walked back inside, leaving Kira alone with the stars and the cold and the weight of what was coming. She stood there a while longer, letting the Montana night seep into her bones. Somewhere out there, Marcus Vance was waiting. The man who'd betrayed everything her father stood for. The man who'd sold American lives for money. The man who'd killed Patrick Donovan. Tomorrow, the debt would come due. Tomorrow, Kira Donovan would show the world exactly what it meant to be Patrick Donovan's daughter. And God help anyone who stood in her way. She turned and walked back inside, ready for whatever came next. The hunt was almost over. The convoy rolled out at 1800 hours exactly. Two Humvees painted the dull gray of winter camouflage, their engines rumbling through the Montana wilderness like distant thunder. The sun had already begun its descent behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed too beautiful for what lay ahead. Kira sat in the lead vehicle now, wedged between Grayson and Holloway. Her gear had been checked and rechecked until every buckle and strap had become part of her body. The Barrett M82A1 rode beside her, wrapped in a drag bag. 50 caliber rounds loaded with the kind of precision that could split a man's skull at 1,000 yards. Outside, the landscape slid past in shades of white and gray. Snow-covered fields stretched to horizons broken only by skeletal trees and the occasional farmhouse, lights already burning against the early winter darkness. This was wild country, the kind of place where people disappeared and nature didn't bother keeping secrets. They were 40 miles from the target, maybe an hour if the road stayed clear, maybe longer if the weather turned. Grayson rode in tense silence, his pale gray eyes scanning the terrain through the windshield. Navigating by GPS and memorized landmarks. The plan was simple in concept, complicated in execution. Get within 2 miles of the target, establish overwatch, wait for the exchange to begin, then move in fast and surgical. Extract the nuclear device, capture or eliminate the principals, disappear before anyone could respond. Simple. Except nothing about this felt simple. Kira watched the terrain through her window, her mind cataloging distances and angles, cover and concealment, the 1,000 small details that separated good operators from dead ones. The training ran deep, automatic as breathing. Calculate fields of fire, identify choke points, map escape routes, stay 3 steps ahead of the enemy. Her father's lessons encoded in her nervous system through years of repetition. Behind them, the second Humvee carried Briggs, Fletcher, Harper, and Kane. Radio silence maintained. Weapons hot, every man ready for the violence that was coming. The first hour passed without incident. Then Grayson's voice cut through the quiet. All stations, hold position. We've got movement ahead. The convoy slowed, then stopped. Through the windshield, Kira could see the lead vehicle's brake lights glowing red in the gathering darkness. Fletcher, who was driving their vehicle, killed the engine. Suddenly, the world was very quiet, just the tick of cooling metal and the whisper of wind through bare branches. Kira slipped out of the Humvee with her weapon ready, moving to the roadside where Grayson and Holloway stood studying something through night vision binoculars. When she got close enough, Grayson handed them to her without a word. She pressed the optics to her eyes, and the world transformed into shades of green. A mile ahead, where the road curved through a narrow valley, vehicles blocked the passage. 3 of them, arranged in a staggered pattern that said checkpoint or ambush. Figures moved between them, maybe 6 or 7. Too far to identify, but close enough to be a problem. Local police? Harper suggested, coming up beside them. Wrong vehicles. Holloway's voice carried the certainty of hard experience. Those are civilian SUVs. High-end, the kind organized crime uses. Could be smugglers, Kane offered. Could be worse. Kira studied the scene, her tactical mind processing options. The road was the only clear route to their target. Going around meant rough terrain, delays they couldn't afford, and the risk of losing the element of surprise. Going through meant engagement, potential casualties, definitely exposure. They're not random, she said, lowering the binoculars. Look at the spacing. They're watching for something specific, waiting for someone. Grayson took the binoculars back, looked again, and cursed softly under his breath. You're right, this is a screening position. Someone knew we were coming. The implication hung in the cold air like a held breath. Someone knew. Someone had leaked their route, their timeline, their operation. Just like Afghanistan, just like the ambush that had killed her father. Kira felt the old rage kindle in her chest, cold and focused. 3 years. 3 years she'd been hunting the leak, the traitor, the person who sold American lives for money. And now, finally, the proof was right in front of her. Marcus Vance had known they were coming. We need to abort, Kane said, his scarred knuckles white on his rifle. Fall back, regroup, come at this from a different angle. We've got 58 hours before the exchange, Harper countered. We abort now, we might not get another shot at that device. Grayson stood silent, his weathered face unreadable in the dim light. Kira could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. The algebra of risk versus reward, mission versus men. It was the same math her father had done 1,000 times. The same impossible equation that had no perfect answer. There's another route. Everyone turned to look at her. Kira pulled out a topographical map, spreading it on the Humvee's hood. Her finger traced a thin line that curved through terrain marked with elevation contours. Logging road from the Cold War era, built when they constructed surveillance stations in these mountains. Runs parallel about 2 miles north. She looked up at Grayson. It's not on most maps, probably rough as hell, but it should bypass this position entirely. How do you know about it? Grayson asked. Because I spent the last week studying every map, every satellite image, every piece of terrain intelligence I could find. Her eyes met his. If someone's trying to funnel us, I wanted to know where the fences were. A ghost of a smile crossed Grayson's face. Your father did the same thing. Always had 3 exit strategies before he entered a room. He taught me well. Grayson studied the map for a long moment, then nodded. Show me the route. If it gets us past that checkpoint without engagement, we take it. They gathered around the hood while Kira traced the path with her finger. The logging road paralleled their current route, but stayed in higher ground. Harder going, especially in snow. But it should put them within striking distance without going through that checkpoint. Should. Confidence level? Grayson asked. I know it exists. I know it runs where we need to go. Kira met his eyes squarely. The rest is risk management. Grayson made his decision with the same swift certainty that had kept him alive for 4 decades. We take the logging road. Holloway, you're on point in the lead vehicle. Donovan, you're with me. Everyone else, tight formation, weapons hot, and if anyone so much as sneezes wrong, we go loud and fast. He looked at each of them. Questions? There were none. They'd all made peace with uncertainty long ago. The logging road was everything Kira had warned and worse. Broken pavement gave way to gravel, gave way to packed dirt turned to frozen mud. The Humvees crawled along at 15 miles per hour, their suspensions groaning. Headlights off, navigating by moonlight and night vision. Trees pressed close on both sides, skeletal branches scraping against metal like fingernails on a coffin lid. Kira rode in the lead vehicle now, pressed between Grayson and Holloway. Her eyes scanned the darkness for threats that could materialize from nothing. The Barrett rode across her lap, too long for the confined space, but too valuable to leave behind. This was the weapon that could reach out and touch someone at distances that made rifles into artillery. Your father and I came through country like this once, Holloway said, his voice barely audible over the engine. Not this exact spot, but similar. Back in '91, right after the Soviet Union collapsed, everything was chaos. Weapons disappearing, nukes unaccounted for. We were part of a team securing sites, making sure nothing fell into the wrong hands. Did you succeed? Kira asked. Mostly. Holloway's eyes were distant with memory. There were always rumors, though, whispers of things that slipped through the cracks. A tactical device here, some uranium there, the kind of stuff that keeps intelligence analysts awake at night. He paused, his weathered face troubled in the green glow of the instrument panel. Your father hated it, hated knowing that somewhere out there, someone had the means to kill thousands, and we couldn't stop it. Is that why you think this operation is real? Kira asked quietly. Because the device actually exists? I think the device exists, Holloway said slowly. I'm less sure about everything else. They drove in silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts, their own preparations for what was coming. Kira thought about her father's last message. 3 words that had driven her across continents and through 3 years of investigation. Find the truth. Simple words, impossible task. But she was close now. She could feel it. The same instinct that had kept her alive through 18 combat deployments was screaming that tonight, finally, the truth would reveal itself. The radio crackled. Fletcher's voice from the second Humvee. Lead vehicle, we've got a tail. Single vehicle, lights off, maintaining distance about 500 meters back. Everyone in the lead Humvee tensed. Grayson picked up the handset. Confirmed visual? Confirmed. SUV, same type as the checkpoint. Could be coincidence. Could be, Grayson said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it any more than Fletcher did. He looked at Holloway. Options? Keep moving, the old SEAL said. See if they follow all the way to the target. Or stop now, Kane's voice came through the radio. Deal with them. Risk exposure. Kira was watching through the side mirror, catching glimpses of the trailing vehicle when moonlight hit it just right. They weren't trying to hide. If they wanted to stay covert, they dropped back further, kill their engine occasionally, use terrain masking. This was deliberate. They wanted to be seen. They're not trying to stop us, she said. If they wanted to intercept, they'd have done it at the checkpoint. This is something else. To what end? Grayson asked. To push us forward, to keep us moving toward the target even though we know something's wrong. She turned to look at him. It's herding behavior. They're not trying to stop us. They're making sure we don't turn back. Grayson's jaw clenched. Every instinct he'd developed over 40 years was screaming at him to abort, to extract, to live to fight another day. But the nuclear device was real. The threat was real. And if they walked away, it would disappear into the black market and resurface somewhere as a mushroom cloud over a city full of civilians who would never know how close they'd come to being saved. We proceed, he said finally, but weapons free. Anyone makes a move, we engage without hesitation. He looked at Kira. Donovan, if this goes bad, you make sure that device doesn't leave the area, whatever it takes. Yes, sir. The last 10 miles took an hour. The logging road deteriorated into something that barely qualified as a trail, forcing them to dismount and walk the final 2 miles. They cached the Humvees in a ravine, camouflaged with cut branches and snow, then moved out on foot in a tactical column. Holloway on point, followed by Grayson and Kira, then the others spread at 5-meter intervals, moving through the Montana wilderness like ghosts, leaving minimal trace of their passage. The mining complex appeared through the trees like something from a Cold War nightmare. 3 buildings arranged in a rough triangle, concrete walls stained by decades of weather, windows either broken or bricked over. The whole site surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence that had collapsed in places. Moonlight painted it silver and black, all harsh shadows and exposed angles. Kira dropped prone at the tree line, 600 meters from the nearest building, and pulled the Barrett into position. Through the scope, the world became a narrow tunnel of magnified reality. She could see the vehicles Holloway had mentioned, 4 of them now instead of 2. Could see figures moving between buildings, at least 15, maybe more. Could see lights in what looked like the central structure, suggesting power, suggesting active occupation. "I count 17 tangos," she whispered into her throat mic. 4 vehicles, 2 are armored. Foot patrol patterns suggest they're expecting trouble, but not from this direction. Most of their attention is on the road approach. Grayson settled beside her with his own optics. "Confirmed, I see the same." His radio crackled softly. "Harper, Kane, your Bravo team. South approach through that maintenance gate. Briggs, Fletcher, you're with Holloway, Alpha team. North approach through the collapsed fence section." He paused, looked at Kira. "Donovan, you're overwatch with Briggs on the second rifle. Engage only on my mark or if compromise is imminent." The teams acknowledged in whispers, then melted into the darkness like ghosts. Kira tracked their movement through her scope, watching Holloway and the others flow through the terrain with the smooth confidence of men who'd done this hundreds of times. Harper and Kane were almost as good, younger but still professional, their weapons tracking potential threats as they moved. Beside her, Briggs had settled into position with his M110 semi-automatic sniper system. Not as powerful as the Barrett, but faster follow-up shots. Together, they could provide devastating overwatch fire. "Your father taught you to shoot?" Briggs asked quietly, his earlier dismissiveness completely gone. "Taught me everything. Started when I was 8 with a .22. Worked my way up." Kira adjusted her scope, compensating for wind, elevation, the rotation of the earth at this latitude. "By 16, I was shooting the Barrett." "What did he say about it?" "About shooting, I mean." Kira was quiet for a moment, memory rising sharp and clear. "He said shooting was like meditation. Everything else falls away until it's just you and the target and the space between. Zen and the art of putting holes in things." "Something like that." They fell silent, watching their teams advance. Holloway and Fletcher reached the fence, slipped through, disappeared into the shadows of the northern building. Harper and Kane were 30 seconds behind, moving toward the southern approach. Everything was going according to plan, which was exactly when plans usually fell apart. Kira's scope swept across the compound in a methodical pattern, checking sectors, looking for the detail that didn't fit. She found it on her third sweep, a man standing on the roof of the central building, barely visible, holding what looked like a radio. Not a guard, guards watched outward. This man was watching the other guards, coordinating, controlling. "I've got a controller," she whispered. "Central building, rooftop, northeast corner. Male, approximately 38 years old, civilian clothes, armed with sidearm and radio." "Can you take him?" Grayson asked. Kira ran the calculations automatically. 600 meters, light wind maybe 3 knots from the east, temperature 18 degrees Fahrenheit. The Barrett could make the shot in her sleep. 600 meters, light wind, temperatures stable. The Barrett could make it. But taking it will alert everyone. We lose surprise. "Hold position," Grayson decided. "Let's see what Alpha and Bravo find." Holloway's voice came through, barely audible. "Alpha team in position. I've got eyes on the interior through a broken window. Multiple hostiles, looks like 12 to 15. They're waiting for something. This isn't a handoff. This is a reception." Before Grayson could respond, Harper broke in. "Bravo team has the south side. I've got visual on what looks like the package. Metal case, right size for a tactical device." Another pause, longer this time. "But Grayson, something's wrong. There are too many people for a simple exchange. This is bigger than intelligence suggested." Kira's scope found the man on the roof again. He was talking into his radio now, animated, clearly receiving information. Then he turned. Even at 600 meters, through a night vision scope, Kira saw his face clearly. Her blood turned to ice. She knew that face, had seen it in briefings, in classified files. in the nightmares that still woke her at 3 in the morning, had seen it across dinner tables, at family barbecues, laughing and joking with her father like they were brothers. Marcus Vance, her father's protege, the man Patrick Donovan had mentored for 4 years, had trusted like a son, had believed in absolutely. The man who had disappeared 7 months after her father's death, his military record sealed, his whereabouts unknown. Until now. Grayson, her voice came out steady despite the rage building in her chest. The controller. I know him. Who is it? Marcus Vance, Navy SEAL, formerly attached to DevGru, went missing after Afghanistan, been classified as AWOL for 2 years. The silence on the radio was absolute. Then Grayson, his voice tight. You're certain? I'd stake my life on it, sir. Kira kept her crosshairs centered on Vance's face. He was my father's student. My father trained him, recommended him for DevGru, vouched for him when others had doubts. Her finger found the trigger guard. If he's here, this isn't a coincidence. This is personal. Holloway's voice cut through, urgent but controlled. We need to abort. If Vance is here, he knows our capabilities, our tactics. He'll have planned for everything we can throw at him. Negative, Grayson said. Then, after a pause heavy with meaning, I knew something was wrong. Kira's head snapped toward him. What? 6 months ago, Vance contacted me, tried to recruit me, offered money, protection, said the wars were over and it was time to cash in. Grayson's voice was tight with controlled fury. I refused, reported it through back channels, but he disappeared before anyone could act. His gray eyes found Kira's through the darkness. I suspected he was the leak that killed your father, but I had no proof. Not until tonight. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Kira spoke, her voice like ice. You knew, and you didn't tell me. I suspected. There's a difference. You brought me here as bait. Yes. Kira felt the words hit like physical blows, felt the old doubts and insecurities that she'd carried through BUD/S, through DevGru selection, through every mission where she'd had to prove herself again and again. For just a second, she wavered. Then she remembered her father's voice, teaching her to shoot when she was 8 years old, his hands steady on her shoulder, his words about identity being the foundation of excellence, about knowing who you are when everything else falls away. She knew who she was. Daughter of Patrick Donovan, Navy SEAL, the woman who would end Marcus Vance's treachery here and now. We're too committed to abort, Kira said, her voice steady again. Alpha, Bravo, hold position but prepare for compromise. Briggs, if this goes loud, your priority is Vance. He does not leave this area alive. Understood. Grayson was looking at her with something like pride. Your call, Donovan. You found him. You planned this. What do we do? What happened next took less than 10 seconds, but felt like an eternity. The lights in the compound suddenly blazed to full brightness. Spotlights mounted on the buildings activated in sequence, turning night into day. Holloway and Fletcher were caught in the open, 20 meters from cover, their positions exposed. Harper and Kane had slightly better concealment, but were still clearly visible to anyone looking. Then a voice boomed across the compound, amplified by speakers. A voice Kira recognized from 100 family dinners, from training sessions, from the last Christmas before Afghanistan. Marcus Vance's voice. Welcome to Montana, Colonel Grayson, Master Chief Holloway, and especially to you, Kira. The use of her first name hit like a slap. I've been expecting all of you. The ambush. The tactical situation collapsed into chaos. Holloway and Fletcher went prone, scrambling for cover as gunfire erupted from multiple positions. Harper and Kane returned fire, their muzzle flashes bright in the darkness. The contractors in the compound moved with professional efficiency, coordinated fire teams engaging from prepared positions. All teams suppress and maneuver. Grayson's voice was calm despite the chaos, decades of combat experience keeping him focused. Kira didn't wait for the order. Her finger found the trigger, her breathing steady, her world reduced to the scope's view. The Barrett roared. The recoil slammed into her shoulder with familiar force. 600 meters away, a contractor dropped, his chest opened by 50 caliber destruction. She worked the bolt, acquired a new target, fired again. Another man down, this one trying to flank Holloway's position. Beside her, Briggs was engaging with methodical precision, his semi-automatic rifle barking every 2 seconds. 3 rounds, 3 hits. Enemy fire diminishing from the southern sector. But there were too many of them. For every contractor they dropped, 2 more appeared. This wasn't a security detail. This was a well-trained defensive force, exactly as Kira had feared. Holloway and Fletcher made it to cover, a concrete barrier that protected them from direct fire. They returned shots when they could, but they were pinned, unable to advance or retreat. Harper and Kane were in better position, but equally stuck, trading fire with enemies they couldn't quite see. Through her scope, Kira tracked Vance as he moved along the rooftop, directing his forces with hand signals and radio commands. He was staying low, using the roof's HVAC units for cover. But he was there, visible, vulnerable. If she could just get a clean shot. "I'm going for Vance," she told Grayson. 60 seconds, I'll have an angle. "Do it fast, we can't hold here long." She shifted position, moving 10 meters to her right to get around the obstruction blocking her view. Briggs provided covering fire, his rifle keeping heads down while she relocated. The Barrett's weight pulled at her shoulder, but she'd carried worse burdens over harder ground. Her new position gave her the angle she needed. Vance was visible now, exposed for maybe 3 seconds as he moved between cover points. Not much time, but enough. Kira settled into the shooting position, her body becoming one with the weapon. Breathing slowed, heart rate dropped. The world fell away until there was only the scope, the target, the mathematics of trajectory and wind and justice. Vance stepped into the open. Kira's finger began the trigger press, smooth and steady, exactly as her father had taught her 20 years ago in the California desert. Then Vance turned, looked directly at her position 600 meters away, and smiled. He raised his hand, held up a radio, pressed a button. The explosion came from behind them, from the ravine where they'd hidden the Humvees. A massive detonation that lit up the night sky, the shock wave rolling over them like a physical thing. Secondary explosions followed as fuel tanks caught fire, as ammunition cooked off, as their extraction vehicles and all their reserve supplies turned into a fireball that could probably be seen from space. "Vehicles are gone," Kane shouted over the radio. "We're on foot. No evac, no backup." Vance's amplified voice came again, carrying across the compound like a mockery of everything they'd planned. "Did you really think I wouldn't plan for everything, Kira? I learned from the best. Your father taught me well, especially the part about always having a backup plan." Kira's finger completed the trigger press. The Barrett fired. The shot was perfect. The bullet tracked exactly where she'd aimed, but Vance had already moved, dropping behind cover the instant before the round arrived. It missed him by inches, sparking off metal where his head had been a heartbeat earlier. Damn it! She worked the bolt, tried to reacquire, but he was gone, disappeared into the building's interior. "All teams, fall back to Rally Point Omega," Grayson's voice cut through the chaos. "Fighting retreat, covering fire. Move now." Holloway and Fletcher broke from cover, sprinting toward the tree line, while Harper and Kane provided suppression. The contractors pursued, their fire disciplined and accurate. Too accurate. These weren't random hired guns. These were professionals. Possibly former military. Definitely well-trained. Kira and Briggs put rounds downrange as fast as they could acquire targets. She dropped 3 more contractors. Briggs got 2, but more kept coming, flowing through the compound like a disciplined infantry assault. It was like fighting a hydra. Then Holloway went down. He was 50 meters from the tree line, running hard despite his 64 years, when a round caught him in the leg. He fell, rolled, came up trying to crawl, but another burst of fire forced him flat. Fletcher turned back immediately, but Harper grabbed him. "You'll just get killed. We need support." "I'll get him," Kira said. She was already moving. Left the Barrett. It was too heavy for what came next. Drew her Sig Sauer P226 and started running toward Holloway's position. "Donovan, negative." Grayson's order was absolute. "That's a kill zone. You'll never make it." She ignored him. Holloway was her father's best friend, the man who'd taught her half of what she knew, who'd been at every birthday and graduation and milestone of her life. She wasn't leaving him to die in Montana mud. The distance was 50 meters. It felt like 50 miles. She ran low, weaving, using every bit of cover the terrain offered. Rounds snapped past her so close she felt their passage, but none found flesh. Her father's training, encoded in muscle memory, move like smoke, be where the enemy isn't looking. She reached Holloway, grabbed his tactical vest, started dragging him back towards safety. "Kira, no!" Holloway gasped, his face pale with pain and blood loss. "Leave me! Get out!" "Shut up, Uncle Frank. You don't get to die today." Her legs burned. Her lungs screamed. Every meter was agony. 40 meters to the tree line. 35. 30. Then the round hit her left shoulder. A sharp spike of pain that nearly dropped her. But she'd been shot before, knew how to compartmentalize it, knew how to keep moving despite the damage. She shifted her grip on Holloway, pulled harder. 20 meters, 15, 10. Then Grayson was there, emerging from the trees with his rifle up, firing precisely placed shots that dropped 2 contractors and made the others dive for cover. He grabbed Holloway's other arm, and together they hauled the wounded operator into the forest. But Briggs was still out there, still providing cover. Kira saw him stand to relocate, saw the contractor emerge from behind a vehicle, saw the muzzle flash that caught Briggs' center mass. He went down hard, his rifle clattering away. "Briggs!" Fletcher's scream cut through the chaos. Kira started back, but Grayson's hand caught her vest. "He's gone. We have to move." She looked back one more time, saw Briggs trying to crawl, saw the contractors closing in. Then the world went white as someone tossed a grenade, and when her vision cleared, Briggs was still. They didn't stop running until they were a mile away, until the sounds of gunfire faded to distant echoes. When they finally collapsed behind a fallen tree, gasping for breath, Kira assessed the damage. Holloway's leg was bad, femoral artery possibly nicked, bleeding heavily despite the tourniquet Fletcher had already applied. Her own shoulder was through and through, painful but not immediately life-threatening. "Sound off," Grayson ordered, his voice steady despite their desperate situation. "Alpha lead, mobile," Holloway managed, his teeth gritted against the pain. "Alpha 2, mobile," Fletcher confirmed, his voice broken. "Bravo lead, mobile," Harper said. "Bravo 2, mobile," Kane added. "Overwatch 1, mobile, wounded but operational," Kira said. The silence where Briggs should have answered was deafening. Grayson looked at his team, at the blood and exhaustion and grim determination. They'd lost their vehicles, most of their equipment, any element of surprise. They'd lost Briggs. They were 40 miles from friendly territory, on foot, with at least one serious casualty and unknown numbers of hostiles hunting them. By any rational assessment, they should abort. Call for extraction, get Holloway to a hospital, mourn their dead, live to fight another day. But Kira's mind was racing with different calculations. Vance was here. The man who'd killed her father was less than a mile away. He'd known they were coming, had prepared for them, had turned their operation into an ambush, which meant he was the leak, the source, the traitor who'd sold out her father's team in Afghanistan and probably a dozen other operations before and since. "He's not getting away," she said, her voice low but carrying absolute conviction. Grayson turned to her, his gray eyes hard. "You have proof?" "I have certainty. He was my father's student. My father discovered something about him, something bad enough to get him killed. Vance has been running ever since, selling intelligence, staying one step ahead." She looked at each of them. "That nuclear device is real, but it's also bait. Vance is using it to draw in operators. He needs to eliminate people who might know what he's done." Her voice caught. "People like us. People like Briggs." The team exchanged glances. Holloway, despite his pain, nodded slowly. "It fits." Patrick suspected someone close, someone who knew operations before they happened. He was gathering evidence when he died. "We're 40 miles from extraction with no wheels and no backup," Kane said. "Even if you're right, we can't fight our way through that force. We don't have the firepower. We don't have to fight all of them." Kira's eyes were cold, focused. "Just Vance. We take him down, we can extract later. But if we leave now, he disappears again. And the next team that comes after him dies too." Her voice dropped. "Just like Briggs." Grayson was quiet for a long moment, the kind of silence that spoke to the weight of command, to the burden of sending people into danger based on judgment calls that might be wrong. Finally, he looked at Holloway. "Can you move?" Holloway gritted his teeth. "With help. Won't be fast, but I can make it." "Then here's what we're going to do." Grayson pulled out his map, spreading it on the ground. "Harper, Kane, you're taking Holloway back to Rally Point Delta. There's an old Forest Service road 3 miles west. You get there, you call for extraction. You get the Master Chief to a hospital. No heroics, no delays." They nodded, unhappy but accepting the logic. "Fletcher, Donovan, you're with me. We're going back to that compound and we're going to kill or capture Marcus Vance." He paused. "After that, we secure the nuclear device or destroy it." He looked at each of them. "For Briggs, sir." Fletcher's voice was thick with grief. "What's our extraction plan?" Grayson smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "We'll figure that out after we complete the mission, same way we always have." They split up 10 minutes later. Harper and Kane helped Holloway towards safety, the old SEAL leaning heavily on their shoulders, but moving steadily west. Their forms disappeared into the darkness, swallowed by the Montana wilderness. Grayson's smaller team melted back into the shadows, heading toward the compound and the confrontation that had been 3 years in the making. Somewhere in the darkness, Marcus Vance was preparing for their return. Somewhere in the darkness, a nuclear device waited to change the world. And somewhere in Kira's heart, the rage that had driven her for 3 years was transforming into something colder, something sharper. Not revenge anymore, justice. The night pressed down on them like a physical weight as they moved through the Montana wilderness. Every shadow could hide an enemy. Every sound could be pursuit. But Kira felt a strange calm settling over her. This was what she trained for, what her father had prepared her for. Not just the tactical skills, the shooting, the movement, the combat techniques, but the mental discipline to stay focused when everything was falling apart. She checked her Sig Sauer, checked her remaining magazines, checked the knife strapped to her leg. The shoulder wound hurt, but pain was just information. It told her she was alive. Everything else was details. Somewhere ahead, Marcus Vance was waiting. The man who'd betrayed everything her father stood for. The man who'd sold American lives for money. The man who'd looked Patrick Donovan in the eye while planning his death. The man who just added Briggs to his body count. The debt was about to come due, and Kira Donovan intended to collect every penny with interest. They approached the compound from a different angle this time, moving with ghost-like silence through terrain that wanted to kill them as much as any enemy. The temperature had dropped further. Every breath created a small cloud of vapor that could give away their position. Grayson led, his decades of experience reading the terrain in ways the younger operators couldn't quite match. Fletcher followed, his grief over Briggs visible in the set of his shoulders, but his professionalism never wavering. And Kira brought up the rear, her senses hyper-alert for any sign of pursuit or ambush. 20 minutes of careful movement brought them to a ridge overlooking the compound. The scene below had changed. The spotlights had been dimmed, the frantic movement of contractors replaced by disciplined patrols. Professional, organized, waiting. Vance knew they were coming back, was counting on it. "I count 8 tangos visible," Grayson whispered. "Probably double that inside." "Vance knows we're coming," Fletcher said. "He's ready for us." "Then let's not disappoint him," Kira replied. She pulled out a small tablet, accessing satellite imagery she'd downloaded before the mission. Her finger traced the compound's layout, identifying weak points, blind spots, ways in that the defenders might not expect. "Northeast corner," she said, showing them. "There's a drainage culvert that runs under the fence. Looks like it feeds into the basement of the main building. Tight squeeze, but we can make it." "How tight?" Grayson asked. "You're going to become very familiar with concrete for about 20 meters. Grayson considered this. A drainage culvert meant confined space, no room to maneuver, a fatal funnel if someone was waiting on the other end. It also meant getting inside without triggering external sensors, without alerting the patrols, without giving Vance time to prepare. "We go in together," he decided. "Donovan first, she's smallest. I'll follow, then Fletcher. We clear the basement level, establish a foothold, then work our way up to find Vance and the device." He checked his weapon. "Rules of engagement are weapons-free. Anyone who's not us is a target. This is not a capture mission anymore." His voice dropped. "This is for Briggs." They moved to the culvert entrance, a rusted grate half buried in snow in dead vegetation. Fletcher produced a multi-tool and went to work on the corroded bolts while the others provided security. The metal fought him, decades of rust and winter refusing to yield. But finally the grate came free with a grinding squeal that seemed loud enough to wake the dead. Everyone froze. 30 seconds passed, a minute. No alarm, no shouts, no indication they'd been heard. The wind had been kind, carrying the sound away from the compound. "I'll go first," Kira said. Before anyone could argue, she slipped into the culvert. The space was exactly as tight as she'd warned, maybe 2 feet in diameter. The walls slick with ice and something organic that she tried not to think about. She pulled herself forward using elbows and knees, her weapon dragging behind her, the darkness absolute. 20 meters had never felt so long. Every few feet she paused, listening for sounds ahead, for any indication that this tunnel led to a room full of hostiles waiting to turn her into Swiss cheese. But there was only silence, and the distant drip of water, and her own breathing echoing off concrete. Then her hand found empty space. She'd reached the end. Kira eased forward until her head emerged into a larger chamber, some kind of mechanical room, lit by a single emergency bulb that cast everything in sickly yellow. Old furnaces sat like sleeping giants, their pipes reaching up into darkness. No movement, no sound except the hum of electrical systems. She pulled herself out of the culvert, cleared the immediate area with her Sig Sauer, then keyed her throat mic twice. The signal for all clear. 3 minutes later, all 3 of them stood in the basement, weapons ready, breath steaming in the cold air. The space was larger than it had first appeared, a warren of rooms and corridors that spoke to Cold War construction, when everything was built to survive a nuclear attack. Concrete walls 2 feet thick, steel doors with locks that looked like they could stop a tank. The perfect place to hide something valuable, or to trap someone who came looking. Grayson checked his GPS, orienting himself to the building's layout. Main stairs should be 30 meters north, but there's bound to be sensors, cameras, maybe motion detectors. "We need to move like ghosts. Or we need to make them come to us," Kira said. She was staring at a circuit breaker panel on the wall, the kind that controlled power distribution for the entire structure. They're waiting upstairs because they think we'll come up the conventional way. What if we don't? What are you thinking? Grayson asked. I'm thinking we kill the power, kill their night vision advantage, use the chaos to maneuver. She moved to the panel, studying the labels. We can black out everything except emergency lighting. They'll have to come down here to investigate, and when they do, we'll be waiting. Grayson smiled. The expression was wolfish in the dim light. Your father would have done the same thing. He loved turning the enemy's strengths into weaknesses. Then let's hope I learn the lesson well. They set up quickly, professional and efficient. Fletcher took position covering the main stairwell, using the furnaces as cover and concealment. Grayson positioned himself at a side corridor that offered enfilade fire across the open space. Kira stayed at the breaker panel, weapon ready, her good hand on the main power cutoff. On my mark, Grayson whispered. 3, 2, 1, execute. Kira threw the breaker. The lights died instantly, plunging the compound into darkness broken only by scattered emergency bulbs. Somewhere above, she heard shouts of confusion, orders being barked in multiple languages. Footsteps pounded on stairs as contractors rushed to investigate. The first 3 came down fast and careless, their weapon lights sweeping the darkness. They made it 4 steps into the basement before Fletcher opened fire. The suppressed weapon coughed quietly, subsonic rounds punching through flesh and bone. All 3 went down in a heap at the base of the stairs. Silence returned. Kira could hear her heartbeat, could hear the breath of her teammates, could hear someone upstairs screaming orders to be more careful, to use proper tactics. The next group came slower, 5 of them moving in a tactical wedge, weapons and lights coordinated. They were professionals, probably former military, definitely trained. They reached the basement floor and began clearing corners, working the space methodically. But they were fighting in someone else's house now, and Kira knew every shadow. She moved like smoke, circling behind them while they focused on the obvious positions. Her father had taught her this, the art of being where the enemy wasn't looking, of seeing without being seen. She came up behind the last contractor in the wedge and put 2 rounds through the base of his skull before he knew she was there. The others spun at the sound, and that's when Grayson opened fire from his position. Caught between 2 directions, the contractors went down hard and fast. One managed to trigger a burst from his rifle before dying. The muzzle flash blinding in the darkness, rounds sparking off concrete and steel, then quiet again. 8 dead in less than 2 minutes. They're going to try something different now, Grayson said. Grenades, maybe, or they'll just seal us in and wait us out. Then we go up, Kira said, before they can organize. Hit them while they're still reeling. They moved to the stairs, stepping over bodies, ascending into darkness that felt thick enough to touch. The emergency lighting cast weird shadows that turned familiar shapes into monsters. Every corner could hide death. Every doorway could be a fatal funnel. The first floor was a maze of corridors and rooms, most empty, some filled with equipment that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. They cleared each space with practiced efficiency, a 3-person ballet of violence and precision. 2 more contractors died, caught alone and unprepared. A 3rd tried to run and caught Fletcher's rounds in the spine. Then they reached the central chamber, and everything changed. The room was huge. A former assembly area or warehouse, its ceiling 30 feet high and crisscrossed with catwalks and support beams. In the center, sitting on a reinforced table, was a metal briefcase. Not large, maybe 2 feet by 18 inches, but unmistakable in its purpose. The nuclear device. Real, present, deadly. And standing beside it, flanked by 4 contractors with automatic weapons, was Marcus Vance. The confrontation. He looked older than Kira remembered, harder. His face had the weathered quality of someone who'd spent too much time in bad places, doing worse things. But his eyes were the same, cold, calculating, the eyes of a man who'd learned to live without conscience. Kira, His voice echoed across the empty space, carrying a familiarity that made her skin crawl. "I was wondering if you'd make it this far. Your father would be proud." She stepped into the open, her Sig Sauer trained on his center mass. Grayson and Fletcher spread out behind her, creating a firing line that covered all four contractors. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The tableau frozen like a photograph, everyone waiting to see who would break first. Then Kira asked the question that had driven her for 3 years. Why? The word came out flat, emotionless. She'd practiced this moment in her mind 1,000 times, had imagined screaming at him, cursing him, making him feel the rage that had burned in her since Kabul. But now that the moment was here, she felt only cold certainty. "Why did you kill my father?" Vance smiled, and there was something almost like sadness in it. "I didn't want to. You have to believe that. Patrick was like a father to me. He taught me everything, believed in me when others didn't." His voice dropped. "But he discovered something he shouldn't have, something I couldn't let him report." "Syria," Grayson said, his voice hard. 2019, civilian casualties. You covered it up. 6 people died because of bad intelligence I provided." Vance's tone was matter-of-fact, confessional. 6 innocents. I panicked. Blamed it on faulty coordinates. Your father investigated, found the truth. He looked at Kira. "He gave me a choice. Confess, or he'd report me himself. So you chose murder instead." "I chose survival." Vance's hand moved closer to the briefcase. "I'd already been contacted by people who were very interested in American intelligence. Russians, mostly. Some Chinese. They paid well, offered protection. All they wanted was information." His voice hardened. "Your father's team in Afghanistan wasn't the first I sold out. Won't be the last. This is war, Kira. The real kind, where money and power matter more than flags and anthems." Kira felt the anger rising, but beneath it, something else. A memory surfacing unbidden. "He saved your life," she said quietly. "Syria, 2018. Before all of this. The building collapsed, killed 2 contractors, trapped 3 more. My father went back in. Through fire and smoke and collapsing concrete. He pulled you out, carried you half a mile to the extraction point." Something flickered across Vance's face, just for a moment. "He told me about it," Kira continued, her voice steady. "Said you cried. Said you swore you'd never forget what he did for you." She took a step forward. "That was before." "Before what?" "Before you decided his life was worth less than money. Before you traded his trust for Russian rubles." Vance's jaw tightened. "You don't understand. I understand perfectly." Kira's voice was ice. "You owed him everything, and you paid him back with a bullet." The room was absolutely still. Even the contractors seemed uncertain, their weapons wavering slightly. "My father died believing in something bigger than himself," Kira said. "You died the moment you put a price tag on that belief. You just haven't stopped breathing yet." Vance's smile faded completely. Big words from a little girl playing soldier. "You think you're like him? You think you can match what Patrick Donovan was?" His voice turned mocking. "You're nothing. A diversity hire with a famous father's name. That's all you'll ever be." Kira felt the words hit, felt the old doubts and insecurities that she'd carried through BUD/S, through DevGru selection, through every mission where she'd had to prove herself again and again. For just a second, she wavered. Then she remembered her father's voice, teaching her to shoot when she was 8 years old, his hands steady on her shoulder, his words about identity being the foundation of excellence, about knowing who you are when everything else falls away. She knew who she was. "Lower your weapon," one of the contractors said, his rifle tracking toward her. "Last warning." Instead, Kira did something none of them expected. She lowered her Sig Sauer completely, let it hang loose at her side. "You want me to be like my father?" she said quietly. Then I'll do what he would do. Vance's eyes narrowed, suspicious. And what's that? Give you a choice, the same choice you never gave him. She met his gaze across the room, her voice steady. Walk away. Leave the device. Disappear. I won't chase you. I won't hunt you. Just go. The room went absolutely silent. Even the contractors looked confused, their weapons wavering. You're serious, Vance said slowly. My father believed in mercy, believed in redemption, even for people who didn't deserve it. Kira's hand stayed away from her weapon. I don't know if I have that kind of strength, but I'm willing to try. For him, for Briggs, for everyone you've killed. She paused. For the man you used to be, before money and fear turned you into this. For a long moment, Vance seemed to consider it. Something flickered across his face, emotion breaking through the cold calculation. Regret, maybe, or the memory of who he'd been before Russia's money and his own cowardice had destroyed him. Then his hand moved toward the briefcase, and Kira saw the detonator attached to its side. I believe you, Vance said. I believe you'd let me walk. That's why I can't. His fingers found the trigger. If I can't have my freedom, no one gets to win. He pressed the button. The detonator was real this time. A metallic beep echoed through the chamber, followed by a digital display on the briefcase flickering to life. Red numbers began counting down. 2 minutes until detonation. C4 charges throughout the building, Vance said, already backing toward a door behind him. Enough to bring this whole place down. And that device, he gestured to the briefcase, it's armed. You try to move it, it detonates early. 2 minutes to disarm, or everyone within 3 blocks becomes a radiation statistic. His contractors provided covering fire as Vance ran for the exit. Time dilated. Kira saw Vance disappearing through the doorway, saw the timer clicking down, saw Grayson moving toward the briefcase, his face grim. 147, 146. Every instinct screamed at her to chase Vance, to finish what her father had started, to end the man who'd betrayed everything, to avenge Briggs. But the device was ticking, and Grayson was just one man against a bomb that needed 2. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Duty first, little warrior. Revenge, never. Grayson, she shouted, I'm with you. She holstered her weapon and ran to the briefcase, ignoring Vance's escaping footsteps. Fletcher pursued the traitor while Kira focused on the bomb. 122, 121, 120. The choice was made. Justice over revenge. Mission over personal vendetta. The living over the dead, just like her father had taught her. The bomb. Kira's hands moved across the briefcase with surgical precision, her fingers finding the access panel while Grayson worked the locks. The timer glowed red in the emergency lighting, each second ticking away like a heartbeat counting down to oblivion. 122, 121, 120. I need light, Grayson ordered, his voice tight with controlled tension. Kira aimed her weapon light at the mechanism. Inside was a nightmare of wires and circuits. Soviet-era engineering married to modern explosive compounds. C4 wrapped around what looked like a modified RA-115 tactical nuclear device. The kind of thing that had kept Cold War analysts awake at night, wondering how many had disappeared from Russian stockpiles when the Soviet Union collapsed. 4 wires, Grayson muttered, his weathered hands steady despite the pressure. Red, blue, yellow, black. Classic setup. His fingers hovered over the wire cutters. But which order? 108, 107, 106. Kira's training kicked in, her mind racing through every technical brief she'd ever received, every bomb disposal scenario she'd run at DevGru. Soviet RDX-based timers followed specific protocols. The KGB had been paranoid about their own people defecting, so they'd built in redundancies, fail-safes, traps for anyone who didn't know the exact sequence. Blue first, she said, her voice certain, then yellow, It's a standard Spetsnaz configuration from the 80s. 058, 057, 056. Your call, Donovan, Grayson said. His fingers gripped the wire cutters, positioned them on the blue wire. If I'm wrong, you're not going to know it. I'm not wrong. Grayson cut the blue wire. The timer kept counting. 048, 047, 046. Kira's heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands stayed steady. Blue had been right. Now yellow. Go, she said. Grayson cut the yellow wire. The timer stuttered, flickered, then resumed its inexorable countdown. 038, 037, 036. Damn it! Grayson's face was slick with sweat despite the cold. There's a fail-safe. I can see it now. Red or black. One disarms, one detonates immediately. His eyes met Kira's. I've got maybe a 50-50 chance of guessing right. 031, 030. Kira stared at the wires, her mind working through the problem with desperate focus. Red or black, life or death. No way to know which was which without more time, more information, more expertise than they had. Then she saw it. A tiny scratch on the black wire's insulation, barely visible in the dim light. Someone had worked on this wire recently. Not red, black. A tell. Her father's voice came to her, clear as if he were standing beside her. Bombs don't know fear, little warrior, but you can master yours. Look for what they don't want you to see. 022, 021, black wire, she said, her voice absolutely certain. Cut it. You're sure? I'm sure. 017, 016, 015. Grayson positioned the wire cutters on the black wire. His hands were rock steady, decades of combat experience keeping them from shaking. But Kira could see the tension in his jaw, the knowledge that if she was wrong, neither of them would feel the mistake. 012, 011. He cut the wire. The timer froze at 0007. For 3 heartbeats, neither of them moved. Neither breathed. The display stayed locked on those numbers, 7 seconds between them and catastrophe. Then the screen went dark with a soft click of disengagement. The mechanism gave a final electronic sigh and went silent. Kira's legs nearly gave out. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself, her shoulder wound screaming in protest at the sudden movement. Jesus Christ, Grayson whispered. His hands were shaking now that the immediate threat had passed. 40 years of combat, and he was shaking. Fletcher's voice crackled over the radio, breathing hard. Found the detonator on Vance's body. I got him. 50 meters from the building, he's down. A pause. Wounded but alive. Kira closed her eyes. Vance was caught. The device was safe. Her father could rest. She'd chosen duty over revenge, mission over personal vendetta. And somehow, impossibly, she'd gotten both. We need to secure this and get out, Grayson said, his voice returning to professional calm. The building charges are still already disarmed, Fletcher interrupted. The detonator controlled everything. Vance had it in his hand when I shot him. It's done. Kira opened her eyes, looked at the briefcase that had almost killed them all. Such a small object to cause so much death. Maybe 15 pounds of precisely machined plutonium and conventional explosives. The kind of thing that could level city blocks, poison entire neighborhoods with radiation. The kind of thing that men like Marcus Vance sold to the highest bidder without a second thought. We need to call this in, Grayson said. Get a specialized team out here to handle the device properly, and we need extraction. He looked at Kira, really looked at her, and something shifted in his weathered face. You did good tonight, Donovan. Your father would be proud. Hell, I'm proud. Before Kira could respond, she heard voices outside. Not hostile, not threatening, but approaching fast. Grayson's hand went to his weapon automatically. Then Harper's voice came through the radio. Friendlies incoming. We got Holloway to the rally point, called for emergency evac. They sent a full extraction team when they heard we had a nuclear device. ETA, 2 minutes. The cavalry had arrived. Kira sank down onto the cold concrete floor, her back against the table holding the now disarmed device. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind the accumulated exhaustion of the longest night of her life. Her shoulder throbbed. Her legs ached. Every muscle in her body was screaming for rest. But she was alive. They were alive. And Marcus Vance would face justice. Grayson sat down beside her, moving with the careful deliberation of a man whose body had been pushed to its limits. For a moment, they just sat there in silence. Two soldiers who'd been to hell and back in the space of 6 hours. "Your father and I sat like this once," Grayson said finally. "After Panama, after he took those bullets from me, we were waiting for extraction, and he was bleeding from 3 holes, and I asked him why he did it, why he threw himself in front of rounds meant for me." He was quiet for a moment, lost in memory. "You know what he said?" Kira shook her head. "He said, 'Because I could, because you're my brother, because that's what we do.' Then he passed out, and I had to carry him to the evac bird." Grayson's voice grew thick. 35 years I've lived with that. 35 years wondering if I'd earned it. If I'd used that life the way he wanted me to." He turned to look at her. "Tonight, I think I finally did. Tonight, I helped Patrick Donovan's daughter finish what he started. Tonight, I kept my promise to use this life for something that mattered." Kira felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. Not yet. Not until this was truly over. "Thank you," she said simply, "for believing me, for helping me, for keeping the promise. Thank your father. He's the one who taught you to be this good." The sound of helicopters grew louder outside, rotors beating the air with that distinctive thump that every soldier recognized instantly. Salvation arriving on wings of steel and determination. Fletcher appeared in the doorway, his face grim but relieved. "Extraction team is landing now. Medical support, bomb disposal, the whole package. They want everyone outside in 5 minutes." He looked at the briefcase, then at Kira and Grayson. "Is it really safe?" "As safe as a nuclear device can be," Grayson replied. "We disarmed the timer, but it still needs specialists to render it completely inert. Don't touch it. Don't move it. Just mark it and let the experts handle it." Fletcher nodded and disappeared back outside. Kira pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the protests from her abused body. Grayson did the same, both of them moving like people who'd aged a decade in a single night. Together, they walked out of the building and into the Montana dawn. Epilogue. The sky was just beginning to lighten, that peculiar gray-blue that comes before sunrise. 3 Black Hawks sat in the compound's cleared area, their rotors still spinning. Figures in tactical gear were already spreading out, establishing a perimeter, beginning the long process of securing the site and cataloging what had happened here. Medics rushed toward them immediately. One grabbed Kira's good arm, started leading her toward a triage area. Another went to Grayson, but Kira pulled free. "Where's Vance?" The medic pointed toward one of the helicopters. "Prisoner transport, under guard. He's been stabilized, but he's not going anywhere." Kira walked toward the aircraft, her legs carrying her forward despite the exhaustion that threatened to drag her down. She needed to see him. Needed to confirm with her own eyes that Marcus Vance was truly caught, truly stopped, truly unable to hurt anyone else. 2 armed soldiers stood guard at the helicopter's open door. They saw her coming, recognized the insignia on her gear, and stepped aside without a word. Inside, strapped to a stretcher, Marcus Vance lay pale and still. He'd been shot in the abdomen, Fletcher's work, and the medics had stabilized him enough for transport. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow but steady. He would live. He would stand trial. He would spend the rest of his life in a cell, thinking about the men he'd betrayed, the lives he'd sold, the blood on his hands. Kira stood there for a long moment, looking at the man who'd killed her father, the man who'd haunted her nightmares for 3 years, the man who'd driven her across continents and through hell in pursuit of justice. And she felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not revenge's sweet release, not the cathartic closure she'd imagined feeling when this moment finally came. Just emptiness. Her father was still dead. Briggs was still dead. All the men Vance had sold out were still dead. Justice didn't bring them back. Justice didn't make the pain go away, but it stopped the bleeding. It prevented more deaths. It meant that no one else would die because Marcus Vance had decided that money was worth more than honor. And maybe that was enough. "I hope it was worth it," she said softly, knowing he couldn't hear her. "I hope whatever they paid you was worth losing your soul." She turned and walked away, leaving Marcus Vance to his guards and his fate. Outside, dawn was breaking over the Montana mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and pink. Beautiful, peaceful, the kind of morning that made you forget that terrible things happened in the world. But Kira would never forget. She would carry this night with her forever, carry Briggs' sacrifice, carry her father's memory, carry the weight of every choice she'd made, every shot she'd fired, every second she'd spent staring at that countdown timer while deciding between revenge and duty. The medics caught up with her again, more insistent this time. She let them lead her to the triage area, let them examine her shoulder wound, let them start the process of putting her back together. Across the compound, she could see Grayson being treated as well. Their eyes met across the distance, and he gave her a single nod. Respect, recognition, a warrior's salute to another warrior who'd proven herself in the crucible of combat. Kira nodded back. The job was done. 3 weeks later, the hospital room at Malmstrom Air Force Base was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors and the whisper of ventilation. Kira sat in a chair beside Holloway's bed, watching the old SEAL sleep. The surgery had gone well, the doctor said. Full recovery expected in 6 months. He'd been awake earlier, long enough to squeeze her hand and tell her she'd done good, that Patrick would have been proud. Now he slept, his breathing steady, his color improving by the day. Beside his bed, a table held cards and flowers and small tokens from the team. They'd all visited, all made sure the old SEAL knew he wasn't alone. That brotherhood didn't end just because the mission did. Kira had been coming every day for the past week, ever since her own release from medical care. The shoulder wound was healing cleanly. Another scar to add to her collection. Another story she'd never tell at parties. "How is he?" She turned to find Grayson in the doorway, his arm in a sling from where a round had clipped him during the extraction. He'd refused to stay in the hospital, discharging himself after 12 hours despite the doctor's protests. "Tough as they come," Kira replied. "Doctors say he'll be walking in a month, probably dancing in 2. Grayson smiled, moved into the room to stand beside her. They both looked at Holloway for a moment, 2 generations of warriors watching over the one who trained them both. "I got word from the JAG office," Grayson said finally. "Vance is officially charged with treason, conspiracy, murder, and about 40 other counts. They've identified at least 8 operations he compromised, maybe more as they dig deeper." He paused. 23 American service members died because of intelligence he sold. "Will he hang?" Kira asked, her voice neutral. "Probably. If not, life in Leavenworth without possibility of parole. Either way, he'll never hurt anyone again." Grayson shifted his weight, favoring his injured side. "Your father can rest easy. So can Briggs." "My father's dead. Briggs is dead. Nothing will bring them back." The words came out harsher than Kira intended, raw with an emotion she'd been trying to keep locked down for 3 weeks. Grayson was quiet for a moment, then put his good hand on her shoulder. "No, but you made sure their deaths weren't in vain. You exposed the rot, cut out the cancer. That matters, Kira. That means something." She wanted to believe him, wanted to feel like justice had been served, like the scales were somehow balanced. But all she felt was tired, empty. The rage that had driven her for 3 years was gone, burned away in that compound, and nothing had rushed in to fill the void it left. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you heal. Take some leave, decompress, figure out what you want next." Grayson's voice was gentle. "Admiral Thompson called me yesterday. He's offering you a position as an instructor at BUD/S, teaching the next generation, passing on what your father taught you. It's good work, important work, and it's yours if you want it." Kira thought about that, thought about standing on the beach at Coronado, watching young candidates struggle through surf torture, pushing themselves beyond what they thought possible. Thought about being the voice that encouraged them, the standard that measured them, the mentor who shaped them into warriors. Her father had done that, had molded Marcus Vance and hundreds of others, teaching them not just how to fight, but why to fight. Most had learned the lesson. Some, like Vance, had lost their way. But that didn't invalidate the mission, didn't make the teaching less important. "I'll think about it," she said. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, two soldiers keeping vigil over a third. Outside, the Montana winter continued, snow falling in soft drifts against the hospital windows. The world kept turning, indifferent to their struggles, their losses, their small victories against the darkness. Finally, Grayson spoke again. "There's something else, something I need to tell you before you hear it somewhere else." Kira turned to look at him, saw the conflict in his gray eyes. "I'm retiring. 41 years is enough. Time to let the next generation take over." He smiled, but there was sadness in it. "I'm 60 years old, Kira. I've fought in more wars than I can count, lost more friends than I care to remember, carried more ghosts than any man should have to." He looked at Holloway's sleeping form. "Your father gave me 35 extra years of life. I used them the best way I knew how. But now," he trailed off, searching for words. "Now I need to find out what comes after, if there's anything after the war." "There is," Kira said quietly. "My father found it, in family, in teaching, in knowing he'd made a difference." "Did he? Find peace, I mean?" Kira thought about her father, about the quiet man who'd grilled steaks on Sundays and argued about baseball. The man who'd taught her to shoot and to fish and to be strong. The man who'd carried the weight of 33 years of service with quiet dignity until someone took that choice away from him. "I think so," she said. "Most days anyway. The rest of the time he had us, and that was enough." Grayson nodded slowly, processing that. "The retirement ceremony is in 2 weeks. I'd like you to be there, if you're willing." "I'll be there." He squeezed her shoulder once, then left, his footsteps echoing down the hospital corridor. Kira sat alone with Holloway for a while longer, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, letting the peace of the moment wash over her. She'd done what she came to do, found the truth, delivered justice, stopped a nuclear device from falling into the wrong hands. She'd proven that Master Chief Patrick Donovan's daughter was every bit the warrior he'd raised her to be. But at what cost? Briggs was dead. Others had been wounded. She'd killed men, probably a dozen or more over the course of that night, each one a human being with their own story, their own reasons for being there, even if those reasons were wrong. The weight of that would stay with her forever. Her father had carried similar weight, had killed in the name of duty, in the service of his country, in defense of his brothers. He'd told her once that every life taken, even in righteous cause, left a mark on the soul. The trick, he'd said, is not letting those marks turn you into something you're not, into something hard and cold and dead inside. Kira touched the sealed trident tattoo on her arm, feeling the raised lines of ink beneath her fingertips. She wasn't hard, wasn't cold, wasn't dead inside. She was tired, grieving, processing, but she was alive, and she had work to do. The next generation needed teachers, needed mentors who understood not just the technical skills of warfare, but the moral weight of what they were training to do. Her father had been that kind of teacher, maybe she could be too. 6 months later, the Pacific Ocean stretched to the horizon, an endless expanse of blue meeting sky. Kira stood on the beach at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, feeling the California sun warm on her face, listening to the sound of surf and suffering, blending into the symphony of Hell Week. Behind her, candidates were struggling through their 5th day without sleep, their bodies pushed past any reasonable limit. She could hear them in the water, could hear the instructors shouting encouragement and criticism in equal measure. She'd accepted the position, had spent the last 6 months learning to be an instructor, to channel her experience into lessons that might save lives. It was harder than combat in some ways, required patience she didn't always have, demanded she watch people fail without immediately helping them. But it was important, worth doing. Holloway had visited last month, walking with a cane but walking. He'd watched her teach, had nodded approval at her methods, had told her that Patrick would have loved seeing her like this, passing on the legacy, keeping the tradition alive. Grayson had retired as planned. The ceremony had been everything it should be, dignified, emotional, filled with warriors paying tribute to one of their own. He'd received his medals and commendations with the same quiet grace he'd shown in combat. During his speech, he'd mentioned Patrick Donovan, had told the assembled crowd about the SEAL who'd saved his life and taught him what honor really meant, had looked directly at Kira while he spoke, his message clear. The debt was paid, the promise kept, the circle closed. Afterward, in a quiet moment away from the crowd, he'd given her something. A SEAL Trident insignia, his own from his first deployment 40 years ago. "Your father gave me a life," Grayson had said. "You gave me a purpose. Now I'm passing this to you. Teach them well, Kira. Teach them what your father taught you. Teach them what we both learned the hard way." She'd taken the trident with shaking hands, feeling the weight of history in the small piece of metal. Now it sat in a frame in her office, alongside her own trident and a photograph of her father in his prime, young and strong and full of the confidence that came from knowing exactly who he was. Vance's trial had been swift and brutal. The evidence was overwhelming, his guilt undeniable. The military tribunal had sentenced him to death, a sentence he'd appealed but that would almost certainly stand. He'd be executed within the year, his name removed from all honors, his existence erased from the proud history of the SEALs. Sometimes, late at night, Kira wondered if she'd made the right choice, if she should have pulled the trigger when she had the chance, ended it cleanly, quickly, without years of appeals and legal maneuvering. But then she'd remember her father's words about honor and mercy, about choosing the hard right over the easy wrong, about being better than your enemies even when they didn't deserve it. And she knew, deep in her bones, that she'd done exactly what Patrick Donovan would have wanted. The real victory wasn't killing Vance, it was being better than him. A young candidate emerged from the surf, stumbling with exhaustion, her face pale with cold and fatigue. She was small, maybe 5'3", probably weighed 120 pounds soaking wet. The other instructors were watching her closely, waiting for her to quit, to ring the bell that would end her suffering. Kira walked over, stood in front of the candidate until the woman looked up. "You thinking about quitting?" "No, ma'am." The candidate's teeth were chattering, but her eyes were clear, determined. "Good, because let me tell you something my father taught me." Kira's voice was firm, but not unkind. "The only easy day was yesterday, but the day you quit is the day you discover who you really are. Don't let that day be today." She helped the candidate to her feet. "Now get back in that water. Show them what you're made of." The candidate nodded, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. She turned back toward the surf, back toward the pain and the cold and the impossible challenges ahead. Kira watched her go, and for the first time in 3 years, felt something like peace settle over her. This was her purpose now. Not revenge, not justice, not the endless hunt for men who'd betrayed their oaths. This was about building something instead of destroying, about creating the next generation of warriors who would carry on the tradition her father had died defending, about making sure that what Patrick Donovan stood for didn't die with him. That evening, she drove to a small cemetery outside San Diego where her father was buried. The headstone was simple, just his name and dates and rank. Master Chief Patrick Donovan, 1959 to 2021, 33 years of service. Kira knelt beside the grave, placing two sealed trident insignias on the stone. One was hers, earned through blood and pain in Hell Week. The other was Grayson's, passed down through a chain of brotherhood that stretched back decades. "Mission complete, Dad," she said quietly. "Vance is in custody. The truth is out. Justice is being served." She paused, her throat tight with emotion. "I didn't kill him. I wanted to. God knows I wanted to. But I remembered what you taught me about honor, about being better than our enemies, about choosing mercy when we don't have to." Her voice caught. "It cost us, though. Briggs didn't make it out. He died covering our extraction. Bought us the 30 seconds we needed to get clear." She touched the cold stone, feeling the familiar ache of loss. "He was a good man. Died doing his job, like you did. Like you taught us all to do." The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Kira watched the light play across the grave markers, thinking about all the warriors who'd gone before, all the lives given in service of something greater than themselves. "Holloway's walking again," she continued, needing to fill the silence with words, with updates, with a connection she'd never quite let go of. "Retirement suits him," he says. "Took up fishing. Catches more lies than fish, but he seems happy." She smiled despite the tears threatening to fall. "Grayson retired too. Says he's done with war. We both know that's not entirely true. But he found peace, I think. Same way you did. In knowing the work mattered. In knowing he made a difference." Kira was quiet for a moment, watching the sunset paint the world in fire. "I'm teaching at BUD/S now, passing on what you gave me. There's a candidate in my class. Reminds me of myself at that age. Small, determined, won't quit no matter what. I'm going to make sure she makes it through. Going to teach her what you taught me." She stood slowly, touched the headstone one last time. "I miss you, Dad. Every day. But I'm okay. I'm doing the work, honoring the legacy, being the SEAL you raised me to be." She turned to walk away, then paused, looked back. "And Dad, I found the truth, just like you asked, just like you taught me to do." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You can rest now." Kira walked slowly back to her car, the California evening warm around her. Tomorrow she'd be back at Coronado, back to training the next generation, back to the endless work of building warriors who understood not just how to fight, but why to fight. But tonight, she let herself grieve. Let herself feel the weight of everything she'd lost and everything she'd gained. Let herself be Patrick Donovan's daughter for a little while longer before she had to be Lieutenant Commander Kira Donovan, SEAL instructor, guardian of the legacy. The work was never done, but for tonight, it was enough. She drove back to Coronado as stars began appearing in the darkening sky, each one a point of light in the vast darkness, each one a reminder that even in the longest night, there was always hope, always honor, always the promise of dawn. Her father had taught her that, and now she would teach it to others. The circle continued, the tradition endured, the legacy lived on, not in the violence and the bloodshed and the bodies left behind, but in the quiet moments of teaching, in the patient cultivation of excellence, in the passing of knowledge from one generation to the next, in the understanding that some things, honor, duty, brotherhood, were worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth living for. Patrick Donovan had known that. Marcus Vance had forgotten it. And Kira Donovan would spend the rest of her life making sure that distinction was never lost on those who came after. The trident on her arm caught the last light of day, the eagle and anchor and pistol gleaming, a symbol of everything she'd overcome, everything she'd become, everything she would pass on to those who came after. Her father's legacy lived on in her, in the candidates she trained, in the warriors yet to be forged, in the battles yet to be fought, and the wars that might never come. That was enough. That was everything. The work was never done. But Kira Donovan, daughter of Patrick, student of Grayson, teacher of the next generation, was ready for whatever came next. The ghost's daughter had become the teacher. The hunter had become the guardian. The circle was complete.